Hey guys, Jay here. So Eversolo sent me both of their streamers to test out. These are loaner units, the Eversolo T8 that comes in around $1,380 and the Eversolo T10, the newest streamer in their lineup, that costs $2,180. And so the difference here is about $800 between the two, and I decided to compare these two streamers to see if that $800 is worth it for the T10. Quick bit of context, last year I was at the Eversolo's factory in China, and while I was there, they put the first production T8 that ever existed into my hands, before anyone outside the building had ever seen it. So I got some history with the little one, and if I have a bias here, it probably runs towards it. You should know that going in. Which is exactly why I'm not gonna tell you to trust my feelings about these units. I'm gonna show you the back panels and all the differences between the two units and the actual differences that matter. You know, the stuff that's true whether or not I'm charmed. And I'm gonna tell you where I land right now because you shouldn't have to wait until the end of the video to find out. I believe, in my opinion, that the Eversolo T8 is what most of you will need. There is a specific person who should buy the T10. I'll be precise about who that is, and it's genuinely an excellent box, but it's a narrower person, narrower scope than the marketing wants it to be. Now, this is a full walkthrough video. I spent months testing out both units side by side, so if this video is a little bit long for you and you're looking for a specific answer to your question, I would recommend using the timestamps below. But if you're really just trying to see which one is the better fit for you, I recommend watching to the end of this video because there's two places where the T10 might be genuinely a better fit for you. Now, the most important thing in this video, and it's the entire thing people get wrong, neither of these has a DAC in it. Not the T10, not the T8. I know that's obvious to some of you, it's not so obvious to everyone. So there's no digital to analog conversion happening inside either box. Neither one can make sound on its own. Neither has analog outputs. Instead, they are called transports. Their entire job is to be a really good digital source. Pull the bits off your network or off your internal drives and hand them to a separate DAC, which does the actual conversion into something your amplifiers can use. So if you're coming from, let's say, the Eversolo DMP A6 or the A8 or even the A10, or if you've been looking at those units have a DAC inside. They're an all-in-one streamer and DAC. The T8 and the T10 needs an external DAC. So if you didn't have a plan to have an external DAC or don't already have one, then maybe the DMP A6 and the A8 and the A10 might be the better fit. So I'll link to those videos that I did in the description below on those units. Now, if you already have an external DAC that you really love, let's say from Denefrips or Live Audio or what have you, and you want to use those DACs, those external DACs that you bought, then this is the right video. The T8 and the T10 is exactly what you're looking for. Now, both the T8 and the T10, they send identical data. Same format, same ceiling out of every single port. The T10 does not push a better stream to your DAC. Both screens on the units are genuinely excellent. Both runs the same excellent software. The T10's is just a little bit bigger, and bigger screens are always cooler. That's aesthetics and convenience, not really sound. Where the sound upgrade comes into play for the T10 really comes down to these two things. The first is the auto room correction and the PEQ, or as Eversolo will call it, the evotune Pro. Better automatic room correction, a higher resolution filter map, plus an entire extra corrective layer that the T8 doesn't have. Set both boxes up, walk away, and the T10 corrects your room more thoroughly. That's the strongest card it holds. So overall, it has better room correction, but we'll come back to that. Second, it has better clocking, and a better internal clock plus an external clock input the T8 does not have and can never have. And for those of you that don't know, a clock essentially is the timing of the data. So the timing is just as important as the data transfer. So we'll come back to that in a minute because I know there's a lot of confusion around clocks and if they actually matter. We'll answer that in this video. But as far as the room correction goes, both boxes let you import your own FIR filter. So the room correction ceiling is actually identical, which means evotune Pro isn't selling you a better result, it's selling you the convenience of not having to do all the work on a third-party software like REW. And the big elephant in the room, clocking. If you're using USB into a modern DAC, that largely gets handled on the DAC side anyways. The important distinction is that you're using USB. And if you are using USB, I would just buy the T8. Unless you are using I2S, AES, coax, running a very resolving DAC, planning an external master clock, or you know for a fact you'll never touch a measurement mic, the T8 actually does majority of what the T10 does and saves you $800 for something else. But not so fast, let me explain a little bit further. Let me be straight with you because a lot of people think this is where the money goes. Both screens are very good. Both boxes run the same very good software. This is not a case where a cheap one gives you a dim, laggy, frustrating panel, and the expensive one gives you the real experience. They are both excellent. The T10 screen is bigger, that's the difference, and that's really it. And I'm not going to pretend that's nothing either because bigger screens are always cooler. Like I said, it looks better in the rack, it's nicer to use. Album art at 8.6 inches is more of an occasion than an album art at 6 inches. That's aesthetics and convenience, and if you're touching this box every day for the next 5 years, aesthetics and convenience are a completely legitimate thing to spend money on. People spend $800 on far more frivolous things than the thing I look at every day is nicer to look at. Just be mindful that the bigger screen doesn't mean a better sound. Which aside from the bigger screen, the physically bigger size and the bigger price point may lead you to believe that this may sound better than the T8 right out of the box. But really, you'll find out that the sound can be tuned to whatever you like on both units. Because once again, the digital output capability is not better on the T10. Let me repeat, the digital output capability is not better on the T10. In fact, they have the same port, same ceiling, same floors. So the thing you would assume separates a transport from a flagship transport, that the expensive one hands your DAC a better stream, is just wrong. I'm not going to pretend that the T10 sends better data, because it doesn't. It sends the same data. Whatever your DAC receives, it receives the exact same thing from either one of these two streamers. Which means the entire case for the Eversolo T10 needs to live somewhere else. But before we get into that, and while we are here, the single most common mistake people make with these needs to be addressed. USB and I2S go to 768 and DSD 512. Everything else stops at 190/24. If you bought this to play DSD or high rate PCM, you have to use USB or I2S. Coax and optical will not get you there. Now, that's not an Eversolo limitation, that's the format. But people buy beautiful gear and then hobble it with the wrong cable, and nobody tells them. So essentially, if you want to use DSD or high-res file playback, then USB and I2S is the only options on both units. And we'll talk about the distinction between the two and which one you should use further into the video. Now, both streamers have the M.2 slot up to 16 terabytes total. The T10s are specified NVMe, otherwise, same capacity, same idea. So that's very neat. 16 terabyte is more than anyone will ever need unless they have crazy amount of DSD files and high-res files stored. But whether it's download music or the music that you ripped from your CD 2 years ago, you can all store it internally within these units so you can stream off directly from the hard drive. Now, aside from the convenience factor of not having to connect to your network via Ethernet cable or even Wi-Fi, and also some audiophiles claim that it sounds better when you play it off a hard drive versus your network. But for the most of us, I think the convenience of playing off our favorite apps and discovery through Tidal or Qobuz, for example, is a great value and something that most of us will be doing with units like this. So the network connection is vital. Now, both units are excellent at this. The T8 has gigabit Ethernet, and the T10 has 2.5 gig. And honestly, for streaming audio, even DSD 512, gigabit is not the bottleneck. 2.5G is a spec sheet win and some future proofing. It is not going to change what you hear. Now, aside from the gigabit Ethernet ports that both units have, they both also have the fiber SFP port. Now, the theory is good. Fiber is galvanically isolated by physics. There is no electrical path. Whatever noise is riding on your network, it does not cross path an optical link. That's not marketing, that's just what it is. So I tried it. And I sat down and was fully expecting to be blown away, but I wasn't. And honestly, I didn't hear a difference between the SFP port and the gigabit Ethernet port. Everything was the same, both sounded excellent, and on both units, I didn't see a much gain in sound quality. I think it's still genuinely a good addition for future-proofing, perhaps, but definitely overkill. And I would rather tell you that than sell you a mystery. If your network is already sane, fiber is solving a problem you may simply not have. It's also on both units, so whatever you think of it, it is not a reason to buy the T10 over the T8. Now, this is a genuine difference between the T10 and the T8. The T10 does have more RAM, and it does have a better processor, which means it will run more fast and more efficiently and more smoothly. But for the application that we're using it for, the streaming and both from the hard drive and from your local network, I don't find either processor or either RAM to be a bottleneck. Both units work just as good, whether you have an extensive library or just streaming off your network. Now, the real difference is not really the clock. I know that a lot of people expect that the real difference is the clock, and all the reviews are really saying so. And yes, there is a difference with the clock, but we'll get back to that because that's less important than the actual difference between the two units, which is the auto room correction. Because obviously, room correction will change what you hear more than any clock ever will, by a mile. It is not close. Your room is the single largest distortion in your system, bigger than your DAC, bigger than your amp, and vastly bigger than picoseconds of jitter. So if the T10 has a better room correction, that matters more than everything else in this video combined. And it does, and let me show you exactly how. The T8 has the regular evotune. The system measures your room and auto-generates an FIR filter map to correct it. The FIR map is the correction. Then separately, you get 10 bands of manual parametric EQs sitting on top of it, so you can make any small adjustments and correction, or even add your own flavor. Now the T10 has the evotune Pro, a higher resolution FIR filter map, then a 20 automated PEQ band whose entire job is to clean up what the FIR filter missed. Then it has 20 more manual bands for flavor or any other little adjustments that you want to make manually. Plus, my favorite, it has loudness compensation and higher level upsampling. Now, I specifically love the loudness control, and commonly this was called a loudness button on old receivers. And what it does is basically compensates for how our ears work. Now, how our ears work is that as we crank up the volume to higher levels, higher volume, we perceive things more linearly, more balanced across the frequency. While at lower volumes, we are not as sensitive to the extremes. So the low bass and the high frequency, we're not as sensitive to it. That's just our ears. And the unit, when you have that loudness control, what it does, it makes sure that across the volume levels, whether it be low volume or a high volume, it makes sure that what you're hearing is balanced. And aside from that, like I said, the T10 has an entire additional corrective layer that the T8 does not have at all. So let me be completely straight with you. In an automatic mode, the T10 is better. Not marginally, not on paper, just better. Higher resolution correction plus a cleanup layer that the T8 simply does not have. If you set up both of these streamers, run the calibration, and walk away, the T10 will correct your room more thoroughly than the T8 will. And that is simply the strongest argument that the T10 has. It's not the clock, it's this. But hold your horses, not so fast. Here's the thing that undoes it all. Both boxes let you import your own FIR filter. Both of them. Which means if you would rather measure your room yourself, REW, focus fidelity, whatever you like, you export a convolution file as a wave or a bin, and you load it straight onto either device. The T8 takes it, the T10 takes it, same door, same boxes. Which really means the ceiling for both of these units when you're using it for room correction is actually just the same. The best room correction either of these boxes is capable of is not evotune, and it is not evotune Pro. And I know Eversolo may not like that response, but it's the filter you make yourself. An afternoon, a measurement mic, and a free software will get you a correction curve that beats either box's automatic pipeline, and the T8 will load it just as happily as the T10 will, just for $800 less. So the evotune Pro on the T10 isn't selling you a different ceiling, it's selling you a more convenient way of doing it without having to go and do a third software like REW if you didn't want to. To put it simply, it's just selling you less work. Now, is that worth $800? Honestly, for some of you, yes. And I'm not going to be snobby about it. If you know in your heart that you are never going to open REW, and be honest, most people never do, the mic stays in the box, the afternoon never happens, and the evotune Pro is real value. It will correct your room better. And I'm not going to talk you out of it. But if you're the kind of person who actually enjoy an afternoon with a measurement mic, and if you're 16 minutes into a video about clock topology, I suspect you might be, the T8 gets you exactly the same place and you keep the $800. Now, whichever route you take, here's the part that may sting a little bit for either party. So I'm not really winning favors for anyone. Well, when it comes to room correction or EQ or what have you, yes, it can help to a certain degree with room nodes below, let's say 300 Hertz, the bass. But when it comes to the mid frequencies and high frequencies, above the shoulder frequency as people will call it, well, the problem is that frequency is less receptive to EQ. It's going to be position dependent, it changes when you move your head, and aggressive correction can make things worse than leaving it alone. Up in those frequencies, the answer isn't really filters. The answer is treating your room. So if your room is genuinely difficult, that you're sitting there and you're messing with PQ and you can't figure it out, you can't get it right, then the chances are you don't have a PQ problem, you have a room problem. And I know that's not something that a lot of people want to hear or face to the reality, but that is the reality. And the reality is that $800 of bass traps will do more for that room than any number of filters papering over it. Now, that's not me being clever, that's just where the money goes furthest. Now, what the audiophiles have been waiting for, the clocks. The T8 has a Femto grade internal clock, and the T10 has an OCXO clock system with PLL. But before I tell you what that even means, what does a clock even do? And I think that's where we should start, because it's actually the most misunderstood stuff in audio. Now, a streaming transport isn't just telling your DAC what the samples are, it's also telling it when. There's a clock in there decoding the timing of every single sample going out the door. And if that clock is even slightly unsteady, if the timing wobbles, that's jitter. Now, at the level we're talking about in gear this good, jitter is not a night and day thing. I'm not going to sell you that. But in the right chain, it can smear the fine timing information that honestly is a huge part of what your brain uses to place instruments in space and to feel the leading edge of a note. Timing is an enormous amount of what we hear, even when we're convinced we're hearing detail. So now back to the two clocks. The T8's Femto clock is a real part. It's not a weak link. But the T10's OCXO clock is oven controlled. It literally holds the crystal at a stable temperature so it drifts less. It is a genuinely higher tier of an internal clock, no argument. But it is incremental. If this was the only difference between these two units, I would not personally spend $800 more on it. Now, I think what matters more is that the T10 has an external clock input. 10 MHz, 25 MHz, 50 ohm, and 75 ohm. Now, as for the T8, it does not have this and you can't add it later. And I want to be very clear about why one port matters more than anything else on this box. The screen, the processor, the RAM, the gigabit Ethernet, those are conveniences. You can live without them. Even evotune Pro, as good as it is, you can work around, make your own filter, import it, there's a path. If you buy the T8 today and 2 years from now you fall down the master clock rabbit hole, and come on, it's this hobby, you might, you cannot retrofit a 10 MHz into a T8. you would have to sell it and buy the T10 anyway. And it is the only thing separating these two boxes where I'll upgrade later is genuinely off the table. You either buy the door now or you accept the door is closed. That's the real weight of the T10. It isn't that it sounds better today, it's that it keeps a specific future open. Now, some of you might be even asking, what is a master clock? Now, master clock is essentially a separate external clock. Much like your external DAC or your external streamer, now you have an external clock that syncs both your streamer and your DAC. And we'll talk about a scenario where that is a good option. However, it is a rabbit hole. And if you're asking yourself, well, do I ever even need a master clock? The answer is probably no. And you'll be fine without it. A lot of people are, including myself. But I'm not going to discourage anyone from doing so because I've heard some people having real, genuine improvements in their system using an external clock. And again, we'll touch base on where that may matter. But here's the part I have to be honest about. We just found that T10's two real upgrades are the room correction, the evotune Pro, and the clocking. Everything else was just size. But here's the problem with both of them. The clocking first. How much that clock matters depends entirely on how you're connected to your DAC. And most of you, it matters far less than you would hope. If you're using USB into any good modern DAC, that DAC is almost certainly doing asynchronous USB. And asynchronous USB means that this is the key idea, this is the whole video, the DAC is the boss of the timing. The DAC's own clock is in charge. It's pulling data across when it wants it, rather than being pushed to the transport's clock, which means the transport's fancy clock has less say over the final timing at the point where conversion actually happens. The DAC retimes everything to its own reference. Now, am I saying zero difference? No, it's system dependent, it's DAC dependent, and I could be wrong at the margins. And I've been wrong before and I'll be wrong again. That's basically this channel's business model. But the honest engineering answer here is that the advantage shrinks a lot. Now, where it stops shrinking is when you're not on asynchronous USB. You're using I2S, AES, or coax. And the source clock now gets a real vote in the final timing. That is where better clock does actually work on a streamer. And that's when an external master clock becomes a coherent idea instead of an expensive ornament. And secondly, the evotune Pro, the real difference, and yes, there is a genuine real difference with the T10 and the T8's autocorrection. The T10 is just much more convenient. However, again, the ceiling isn't with the evotune Pro or the evotune on the T8. Both have the same ceiling if you have the capability and the expertise, which doesn't take much, to use REW and import your own FIR filters. That way, you don't really run into a problem of having a ceiling on either unit. And it's far less expensive because REW is a free software and all you need is a calibrated USB microphone, much like from the likes of Mini DSP. Now, I'm not a particular fan of telling people what to buy. I feel like everyone should really choose that for themselves. But if you want a recommendation from me, as a lot of people ask, well, my recommendation is that you buy the T8 and skip the T10. Unless you're using anything else other than USB, it's just not a good reason to buy the T10. USB into a good modern DAC is all you really need, especially if you have no plans to have a master clock in your future. And you're either happy with automated FIR correction, or you're willing to spend one afternoon making a better filter yourself and loading into it, which the T8 will just, again, happily take just as the flagship will. And you can even take that $800 and put it into treating your room, which I can promise you will go further than any of the capabilities of the T10 over the T8. Now, there are scenarios where a person should buy the T10 over the T8. And by this part of the video, you should know who you are. But let me just repeat. If you're using I2S, AES, or coax, the transport clock gets a real vote. So the T10 might be worth it for you. If you plan to run an external master clock, buy the door now because you can't add it later, full stop. You want the best possible room correction with zero homework or extra work with a REW and a separate microphone and all that. Then the higher resolution FIR map plus the automated cleanup layer, and you know yourself well enough to know that the measurement mic would sit in the box forever, then yeah, the T10 is very much worth it. It buys you that convenience. Now, of course, if you simply want the flagship, the big screen, the statement front end in the rack, and you know that's what you're paying for, I respect that. It's a legitimate reason to spend money. It's just a different reason than just sound quality. Now, there's a well-documented effect where the brain literally encodes expected value into the experience itself. Tell someone a wine is expensive and the reward center lights up more. Same wine. And the part everyone misses, they are not lying. They're not being snobs. The pleasure is actually stronger because the price tag becomes part of the signal. The expectation isn't sitting next to experience, it's inside it. So yes, a $2,000 box with a big glowing screen is doing that to you before it plays a single note. That's not a moral failing, that's just machinery. Which means if you had to squint to make yourself fit that T10 list, that squint is your answer. That squint is the expensive wine effect. It is very, very convincing, and it will happily spend that $800 for you. Eversolo sent me both of these boxes, and yes, I had that glowing flagship effect as well, and I could have easily pointed at the flagship as the better unit, clearly the better unit, if I didn't spend much time with it. I'm pointing at the other one for most of you because that's what the boxes actually told me in the months I've spent with it. And the reason is bigger than these two. In the analog world, more money usually means it buys you more. More of something you can point at and put your hands on. In digital, that instinct breaks, and it breaks in a way that's genuinely disorienting for people coming up through this hobby. Because the expensive box is very often sending the exact same bits as the simple, cheaper box. The upgrade isn't the data. It is the timing and the software and the screen. And whether any of that reaches your ears depends on a chain of ifs that nobody selling you the box has the slightest incentive to walk you through. So the question was never which one is better. The T10 is a more capable box. No argument, it just is. The only useful question is which of these differences actually reaches my ears in my system connected the way I have it connected. And that's a question a spec sheet can't answer and a YouTube thumbnail definitely can't answer, including mine. So I hope that this video really helped you break down on whether you need the T10 or the T8, and not just upgrading to the T10 because it's a flagship and it must sound better. Because the reality is, it doesn't. There's a very specific things that the T10 does that some people may want and may actually need. But it may not be you. And for majority of us, the T10 is an excellent streamer. And it is the streamer that I would recommend for people on budget that just wants an excellent streamer. Now, with that being said, I want to hear your answer. Are you a person that would require the T10 or perfectly happy with the T8? Let me know in the comment section and your reasoning for it and if I missed anything. And yeah, that's pretty much it from me, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Until next time.